Disclaimer, so this was meant to be just a review on a bad movie, but this ended up becoming the most detailed and extensive research project I have put myself through since I was back at uni, so brace yourself. There's going to be a lot of information, because I want to teach you everything that I've learned about this. Apocalypse Now is one of the most iconic films in Hollywood history, and it's an absolute masterpiece. It had an epic sprawl and a deep, insightful look into inhumanity and the horrors of war. It was also notorious for having one of the most troubled productions in Hollywood history. It experienced unprecedented production issues, such as entire sets being destroyed by weather, the lead actor having a mental breakdown on camera and then nearly dying from a heart attack, and the Philippine government calling away helicopters that were being used for filming so they could go and fight rebels. Despite all this and a budget that skyrocketed from $12 million to $31 million, the film was a phenomenal success. Now imagine what would have happened if Apocalypse Now went through all that and ended up completely bombing as bad as Heaven's Gate did back in 1980. Well, as it turns out, that actually exists. It's a film called Inchon.
Delightfully devilish, Seymour.
Yes, everybody, welcome back to Delightfully Devilish, the show where we discuss films that all at once meet the criteria of being the good, the bad, and the ugly. I'm your host, Jukebox Harry, and today we are looking at one of the most scandalous, troubled productions in Hollywood history, and a film which has a poster that looks like highly stylized 80s box art for a collector's edition of the game Battleship. Inchon was a 1982 war film with a budget of $47 million. That's 1.5 times the budget of Apocalypse Now. And if you consider the fact that a film has to double its budget to at least break even at box office, it made 5.6% of its investment back. Inchon is a failure of astronomical proportions, but at the same time it was also a project that was funded by an insane cult leader who claimed to be the second coming of Christ and called for a genocide against gay people. So the fact that it failed is genuinely a very good thing. Every single thing that critics praised about Apocalypse Now was everything that they condemned about Inchon. Inchon is like the evil twin of Apocalypse Now. It's like the polar opposite in so many ways. It's a film about the Korean War, a war which I do not know the first thing about, because no Hollywood studio has ever decided to fund a Korean War film ever since Inchon failed. And with the legacy of being called possibly the worst war movie of all time, I really had to see it to believe it. So, let's invade. Another disclaimer. Yes, this is a very rough looking copy of the film I'm showing you. That's because the only release this film has ever seen outside of its initial limited run back in 1982 was a couple of screenings on the Good Life TV network, a network owned by the Unification Church, which is the cult that produced the film. Inchon survives today only in the same way that the Star Wars Holiday Special does, through VHS recordings which have circulated the black market and been reproduced as bootleg copies of the film. So this rough looking version of the film is probably the only copy we're ever going to get to see. Inchon starts with some exposition narration which already tells you that the creators of this film are rather amateur. They reference World War II for no other reason than to literally say, this is a war that happened, but this is a film about another unrelated war.
The war to end all wars had ended.
That line must have sounded so dramatic on paper. When you say it out loud, it's fucking pretentious. Basically, this intro scene outlines that North Koreans joined forces with Russia and were granted weaponry to invade South Korea. It doesn't give us any history of why this is happening. The opening narration just implies that war is second nature to the world and that this is how North Korea obtained their weaponry. Inchon! From the same studio that bought you Mars Attacks, Airplane, Goal, and Tora Tora Tora! But not really. We begin to see the film unfold with shots of attacks breaking out, and things already don't feel right. With no emotional build-up whatsoever, we're dropped right in the middle of some kind of attack without even being given a reason why we should care about it. There's no mood whatsoever, no feeling of tension or tragedy, it's just happening. And the cinematography is very amateur. It's as if someone just put a camera there solely because filming was an obligation to complete this movie, not because the director of photography actually wanted to convey a particular mood or feeling with visual grace. We're not even 5 minutes in, and this $47 million production already feels like a low-rent TV movie for the History Channel made solely for the least demanding geriatric audiences. Then we cut to a shot of what I assume is some Korean village. We see a random woman getting on a bus, and a white woman going tourist shopping. Because those are the exact things you would want to see in a big-budget Hollywood war movie, right?
Wrong.
When the characters do talk, if they have anything slightly relevant to say, it's spoken in fractured English, which is clearly audio dubbing by people who have never acted before. And it's even more difficult to make out because the audio is so distorted and drowned by background noises.
From the north, the communists have crossed the border. Listen.
In comes a tank to run over everything and shoot everyone. And I'm honestly glad, because I don't care about any of these people and don't have a reason to, so I just want to be distracted by spectacle. Again, there's no emotional build-up to this scene, so it's just a hollow depiction of destruction. But I'd still rather this than watching the soap opera that was here a second ago. But something just doesn't sit right when the tanks actually begin firing. Every single time a tank fires, this sound plays out. Now, compare that to the sound of tanks getting shot in literally any other movie ever.
They got a tank.
Fucking get it out!
Yeah, you know what the sound effect in Inchon is? To summarize everything wrong with this technical blunder, I'm just gonna say, Inchon does not understand sound. While Koreans are being torn to shred by the attacks, guess what we get to watch? Not the reactions of locals having their homes destroyed and their family members slaughtered. We get to watch a goddamn white woman getting driven around. How on earth do you take a story about the genocide of South Korean people and make it into a tale of a white woman getting chauffeured around?
No. Somebody get the hell out of here without...
Add that to a list of dumb decisions made by an incompetent technical crew. The editors on this film decided to cut midway through this character's cut to the bad guy from Roadhouse talking to his Asian mistress about divorcing his wife.
What's between you and me has nothing to do with anything else.
That is the one line of dialogue in this film that I like in any way, because it serves as a meta-commentary on how the subplot of this character and his mistress are completely irrelevant to anything that's actually happening in the story. And it's as if the actor Ben Gazzara is literally telling me not to care about the characters, which I wasn't going to anyway, but...
Just remember one thing. I love you.
Well, I think if you're going to say it with the charisma of a misguided Jason Statham, then I don't think she is going to remember it, or at least not for the right reasons.
There's something I've always wanted to tell you. I love you.
Roadhouse goes to visit the greatest samurai in movie history, actor Toshiro Mifune from Seven Samurai and Yojimbo. Why is he here? I don't know. His character is even less relevant than any of the others, and his role in the film ends up being little more than a glorified cameo. I really wonder if the producers of this film were hoping to tap into the Japanese market by making a loose reference to Japan in the intro narration and then casting a Japanese legend. But, and I could be wrong when I say this, it takes more effort than that. Then we cut back to the attack. I didn't edit that clip myself. That's literally how it played out in the film. It cut midway through shot to show the same shot a couple of frames later. It's an incredibly awkward jump cut. I know the Golden Raspberry Awards don't have a Razzie for worst film editing, but if they did, Inchon would serve as the magnum opus of that award. And again, the editors continue to amaze me with their incompetence. They spliced an inanimate and completely irrelevant frame into this film for a couple of seconds and just pretended it was so normal. Every single time I think the editors can't possibly come up with a new ridiculous mistake to make, they find some way, some innovative fashion to create a whole new level of terrible editing that has never been seen before.
Oh no, we're not done yet.
So apparently this guy's commander was Kylo Ren in Star Wars The Last Jedi.
I want every gun we have to fire on that man.
Cut back to the boat trip and it's over. Roadhouse gets up and meets up with Richard Roundtree, the star of Shaft and Maniac Cop. And it turns out General Douglas MacArthur has a base in Japan. So that's where Japan comes into the story. The activities at this base include a bunch of white people filling dead air while they drink instant coffee. Remember that this film is meant to be about a major turning point in the Korean War, and we're watching a bunch of old white people drink coffee. They sit down, then get up and leave, and midway through send
God help Korea and God help us all.
some geriatric with a giant forehead comes out of a bathroom and starts screaming.
I warned Washington. I knew it. I knew it. What do you expect from politicians?
And he keeps screaming on the phone at the dinner table.
Frank!
So you come crawling back, you cheap sack of shit.
And remember one thing.
Roger, sir. Yes, sir, I'll remember that.
Will you really? With all those sounds going on, I don't believe you would have heard it. The two stars walk across the threshold while explosions are happening in the background, but they're so calm about it like they're going for a weekly stroll. You can tell the actors aren't actually involved in the material at all because there has got to be as little soul on set as there was in the final product of the movie. Big forehead guy and another white woman are eating dinner. And then he's at the MacArthur base. Oh shit, the genocide is happening again. The film just awkwardly weaves back and forth between the attacks and the drama like it's nothing. Oh look, we're back in a different situation again. A bunch of Koreans marching through the territory. But don't worry, we're back to focusing on that white woman just a few seconds later. This time she's having to face the first world problem of having to drive her own car because her driver got killed earlier.
A woman driving. That's adorable.
After letting Koreans suffer in danger out in the street for so long, she finally let some kids in.
What's he saying?
They're gonna explode up the bridge.
There's another moment where the poor audio really stands out because the obvious ADR sounds nothing like any other character's voice in the entire film. And apparently the sound that tanks don't even make is the same sound that Koreans make when they fall underneath tanks. This bridge comes under attack. Everyone starts jumping ship.
Did someone just go flying?
Someone jumped. He jumped! That's it, he jumped, guys, he jumped! The day's over!
And the Koreans blow up the bridge to prevent the communists from using it. And then Inchon gives us a completely unbiased perspective of the side of North Korea in the war.
그런 자들은 제치하시오.
The approach to the politics in Inchon make the war seem completely black and white. The North Koreans are killing the South Koreans just because. They never have any dialogue to explain their motivations or convictions. They're just evil because they're North Korea. And because they're communists, which, you know, makes them automatically evil when you've been raised in a conservative Western patriarchal society. Big forehead guy gets a call.
MacArthur.
Oh, shit. This is meant to be the film's hero, General Douglas MacArthur. So this legendary war general is getting played by a man many consider to be the greatest actor of all time. And yet the only way I can describe the look of MacArthur in this film is to say that it looks like they tried to make a skull out of wax and it started melting. It's some awkward look which doesn't actually look either like Laurence Olivier or General Douglas MacArthur. For a film that has been called Korean War propaganda, Inchon is going to have a tough time converting viewers when its protagonist actually looks like a Joan Rivers abortion.
You and all your family are well, I trust.
Okay, obviously that wasn't in the film, but trust me, that meme right there has way more dramatic merit than anything in this film. Inchon also plays on conservative religious values so heavily that it won't even let Douglas MacArthur sleep in the same bed as his wife, or the same room.
Since when did you ever care what other people thought about you?
I guarantee you, that line right there, that's exactly what Laurence Olivier's agent would have told him to convince him to take on a role in a piece of shit like this. Cut back to that woman driving. She gets stopped by a random Korean, and then just fucking shoots the guy before driving off. I had to rewind this scene to figure out what the hell was happening. One of the girls in the car claims this was a communist soldier, but there's a fair chance it might not have been. He's not in a military uniform, and after he gets shot, there's no military forces giving chase to her vehicle. This whitey might have just killed an innocent Korean person. And in another testament to the film's editing, after driving off, the film decides to fade right into a shot of the car no longer moving because the engine is stalled. There's no shot of the car stopping in its tracks, it just cuts to a point where that has already happened. But Shaft comes by to help.
You wouldn't believe what we've been through. The kids, the car.
South Koreans have been literally getting slaughtered in a mass genocide all across the country. You had to drive some kids around, and you shot an innocent Asian man because one of the kids told you to. Back to another random attack. A couple of bangs and booms, and then General MacArthur lands in Inchon.
Let me tell you a little story. It'll take your mind off other things.
Nope, in my video I am not going to let him tell you that story, because it's another shameless exposition story that goes on forever and is also incredibly factually inaccurate. He tells a very inaccurate story about General Douglas MacArthur's father, but it's also so boring and arbitrary to the rest of the film that I don't want to waste time unpacking that when there's so much other shit here to unpack. Cut back to tanks on the move. They're still making that gunslinger sound. Briefly, we get to see MacArthur talking about how brilliantly the counterattack against North Korean forces has been. This scene also reveals that Inchon wants to give us a bigger perspective on MacArthur's devotion to God than on his brilliant military leadership.
God is on our side.
And the crazy Korean-killing white woman won't let those poor Asian kids out of her car. So she's gone from murder to kidnapping. Nice transition. A bunch of Vietnamese farmers start fighting back against the communists, or something like that. I don't know. In this scene I couldn't tell who the good guys and the bad guys were, and honestly I just didn't care. Then we have a group of white guys talking about their intentions for Operation Chromite, the actual operation which spearheaded the collapse of the North Korean People's Army in the war. Honestly, this scene should have been good. This is the scene that really could have taught us about the brilliant military tactics of the attack. But unfortunately, by this point in the film, I'd given up any hope we were going to get something interesting or dramatic enough to hold my attention. After watching this movie, I actually did a lot of research about Operation Chromite. It was a surprise amphibious attack by the United Nations which led to the recapture of the South Korean capital city of Seoul. This was a plan that was opposed by a lot of military leaders, but ended up happening because General Douglas MacArthur convinced everyone it had to happen. It even happened despite the fact that a North Korean spy was found to be in possession of the plan, and the UN couldn't figure out whether he had actually transmitted that information back to the North Koreans. So right in this scene, we should get some brilliant military insight and a powerful look at Laurence Olivier using his Academy Award-winning charisma to win over the uncertainties of the other characters. Unfortunately, it ends up having the dramatic grounding of a geriatric business meeting. A bunch of random old white guys stand up and say, "I disagree," before MacArthur makes a dramatic entry. Okay, it's not even really all that dramatic. Even when he lights up a pipe beforehand, which he then proceeds to wave all over the place for some reason. If there was ever going to be a moment in this film where Laurence Olivier was going to shine, this is it, right?
Nope!
There's no emotion in this scene, the dialogue lacks enough detail to fully explain the situation to audiences, and it was so boring that I got distracted by the fact that Laurence Olivier unintentionally started hailing Hitler halfway through. And when he's not underacting, he's overacting.
I can almost hear the ticking of the second hand of destiny. We must act now, or we will die!
Laurence Olivier publicly admitted in interviews that he did not give a shit about this film, so the fact that he turns in a probable career-worst performance comes as no surprise. When it's finally over, we get some really annoying bagpipes playing while we watch soldiers marching through, followed by footage of... I'm not exactly sure what. It just reminded me of the underground activities by the motorcycle gang in Stone Cold.
Instead of fighting each other, next time, fight against the enemy!
He's right. That's a flawless way to ensure victory. Then why people keep talking for no reason? I'm not going to waste your time on this anymore. Between this and the attack on Inchon, it's nothing but talking and nothing interesting. 1 minute ago, we had characters talking about the attack on Inchon. Now we have characters talking about Oriental spells.
Does she cast some special exotic Oriental spell that I know nothing about?
And laundry.
You promised to get this cleaned.
Hitler promised not to invade Czechoslovakia, Jeremy. Welcome to the real world.
After 17 straight minutes of people talking for no reason, something starts happening. This cunt gets stabbed. And then they're back on a boat. And an explosion happens for some reason. This is meant to be the start of the operation, but does anyone really care?
No.
No. No. No. No. No. No.
No.
No.
No. No.
Yes. I mean, no. No.
It doesn't start off well, with MacArthur giving a very long dramatic speech where he pauses in between every word, like this.
It is with sadness and regret.
Get on with it. Yes, get on with it!
But the operation kicks off. But now that we are at the climactic battle that the film's title emphasizes the dramatic poignancy of with a fucking exclamation mark, the movie just turns around and says, "Fuck you epileptics," by giving everyone seizures. Just look at the dramatic display of flashing lights going on here. It's like an Italian action movie went all Electric Soldier Porygon on everyone.
You got a seizure now?
Then the film shows us a bunch of battleships from so far away that even if they're not miniatures, I'd easily believe that they are. By this point in the film, we have passed the 2-hour mark. That means that the film expects the Battle of Inchon to start and finish before the movie itself finishes 17 minutes later. And remember, the Battle of Inchon was meant to be an extremely dangerous and ambitious attack of unprecedented success. And it gets reduced to literally the most boring beach landing scene in movie history. I would fully believe that this entire scene was shot by only one camera, which would just sometimes aim to the right, then to the left, then zoom in, then out, then back to the middle. It's the most mechanical and lifeless way to depict any attack, and it's all over after 7 minutes. I would normally be thoroughly disappointed by any film making me wait 2 hours for a dramatic action climax that looked like that. But the truth is that the entirety of Inchon is so lifeless and boring that if you expect anything more from the climax, you're just setting your standards way too high. The white woman is now dressed like a Ming vase. Sentimentality because kids. Flags, and MacArthur literally addressing the crowd by saying the Lord's Prayer.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Get on with it!
Actual footage of Douglas MacArthur saying stuff. The end. It is thoroughly difficult for me to actually condense every criticism I have for Inchon, but I'm gonna try. Writing. There are 4 stories running. One about a bunch of unexplained attacks. One about a bald guy who goes between meetings at the airport Hilton and his hotel room. One about a woman driver, and one about a guy cheating on his wife. These characters communicate entirely through making small talk, with nothing interesting or valid to say, and the story itself doesn't tell me enough about the Korean War to make me care. Acting. Devoid of any life.
Just remember one thing. I love you.
Or completely over the top.
We shall be fighting another bloody feudal war somewhere else, a year, 10 years from now.
Editing. Pointless small talk interwoven with irrelevant combat scenes. Mid-sentence cuts. Epileptic seizures. Random extended frames left in the film, and other frames that are inexplicably missing. Sound. Obvious ADR.
They're gonna explode up the bridge.
Too much noise to make out the dialogue. Objectively wrong sound effects. Production values. Cinematography. A film that is presented in the same visual style of a macaroni combat film like Inglourious Basterds. That's to say it has no visual style. When I think of war films that I haven't enjoyed, there are a couple of recurring problems that I find. Some films occasionally have an amazing spectacle but get dragged down by an excess of arbitrary and boring dialogue, such as Flags of Our Fathers and Tora Tora Tora. Inchon embodies the abundance of boring dialogue from these films but doesn't come a fraction close to the spectacle that these films created. Another example is war films that focus primarily on trying to keep audiences in the moment by confronting them with the realism of being there, but ultimately forget to spend enough time telling us why we should care about the story or the characters. Films that meet this criteria would be Black Hawk Down and The Green Zone. Inchon doesn't make this exact mistake, but that's because it doesn't try to have any style or convey the mood of being in the war at all. But the worst example would be a war film made entirely in the wrong style, such as in the generic John Wayne Western formula of the Green Berets, or the overblown melodrama of a misguided 90s disaster film like Pearl Harbor. Inchon is a big budget movie made as a television soap opera half the time, and a macaroni combat film for the rest. Honestly, if you used all the footage of attacks in this film as stock footage and then shot a bunch of new footage with Richard Roundtree as a jingoistic action hero, you could somehow end up Frankensteining this movie into a shameless 80s action film in the style of a Chuck Norris vehicle like Missing in Action. Another option would be to cut all the supporting characters in the film so that you're left with only Laurence Olivier and the attack scenes. That wouldn't make the film better objectively, but it'd raise it to the same standard of the film Fantastic Four: The Rise of the Silver Surfer. It'd be a pile of the same shit that its predecessor was, but a whole lot less of the shit because of a shorter running time. To be fair, if Inchon didn't cost $47 million, it'd be just a forgettable war film. But since after inflation that film's budget ends up being the same as Ready Player One, and yet a final product that ends up looking like the war movie equivalent of a spaghetti western, that just makes the misguided nature of the actual production process so much more apparent. And yet this is where the interesting story of Inchon lies, in its production history. Many critics like to say that the documentary Hearts of Darkness, which was about the making of Apocalypse Now, is better than the film itself. I judge them as two different entities, but there's no denying just how incredible the documentary was in confronting its audiences about the creative process of filmmaking in the face of colossal production catastrophe. Similarly, 2014 saw the release of the documentary Lost Soul, which is about the catastrophic production of the 1996 film The Island of Dr. Moreau. Like Inchon, that film is considered one of the worst movies of all time, and its documentary was a phenomenal in-depth look at a hellish production. That troubled production and terrible film turned into an incredible documentary, so I wonder, can the same thing be done with Inchon? This is a film that is crying out to have a mainstream documentary made about it. I mean, entire sets were destroyed by weather, cardboard cutouts were used instead of actual aircraft in scenes. One of the actors literally died during filming, forcing the entire movie to be rewritten. And on top of it all, this movie was meant to be a piece of religious propaganda, funded entirely by a conservative church, which has frequently been called a dangerous cult. Now luckily, the Unification Church lost $44 million on this film, because no church or cult should have that much expendable income. That's just unethical. But unfortunately, seeing how this film has never been released on home video and has been completely disregarded by its creators, it seems that the Unification Church is very protective of their film for some reason. So unfortunately, the true story about the production of this film will probably never see the light of day. As a final note, after watching Inchon, I wanted to understand more about General Douglas MacArthur, so in one day I sat down and watched 3 films where different legendary actors had played him. 1977's MacArthur came first, and it was very bland, but Gregory Peck portrayed him as a very charismatic yet very straightforward war intellectual.
I think that Inchon will finish the North Koreans.
It'll never be approved.
How could it not be approved?
2012's Emperor was even worse. Tommy Lee Jones played him as Tommy Lee Jones, which felt perfectly fine, but he was a background character to a tedious romantic subplot.
Let's show them some good old-fashioned American swagger.
And finally, 2016's Operation Chromite, which was probably the worst. The entire film was an action B-movie which felt like a high school reunion for a drama class that once put on a production about the Korean War. And Douglas MacArthur was made so irrelevant that nobody on the production noticed that Liam Neeson was playing him just as every Liam Neeson action hero ever.
I am Douglas MacArthur. Initiate Operation Chromite.
I have no idea why Douglas MacArthur was considered so notorious that people kept on wanting to make films about him. All these stories ended up being so boring, but all 3 of these films and their portrayal of MacArthur was way better than Inchon, because the people making these films stopped and said, what if we don't portray him as Bob Newhart dying of leukemia? But all this being said, I have no less respect for Laurence Olivier for taking this role in the film. He openly admitted he was selling out and making this movie, just trying to get a large paycheck so he could leave it to his family when he died. And is it really the worst performance of his career? Well, probably. Watching this film, you get to see the side of a Shakespearean legend drop in and out of his role. He delivers most of his words like he's already dead, but in his more melodramatic moments, it feels like he's conveying the physical pain of actually dying in his words. You could argue that Laurence Olivier is playing this role like a performance piece about the pain of dying, but that would be giving it way too much credit. Inchon gets 2 days wasted watching films about a boring-ass war general out of 10. It's probably the most expensive and misguided B-movie ever made, which tries so hard yet so lazily to be something more that it doesn't end up having the guilty pleasure of an actual B-movie. And yet at the same time, it serves as an interesting case study of how a film can cost so much and have such an experienced director, yet end up making so many innovative mistakes in the editing process. I wouldn't go so far as to call it one of the worst films of all time objectively, but if you consider just how much it cost, you could give it that label from a subjective point of view. And that does it for today's very long episode of Delightfully Devilish, you guys. If you have any ideas of movies you want me to discuss on this show, please leave them in the comment section below. If you'd like to see more episodes, please hit that subscribe button. Otherwise, please be looking out for yourself during this time of the coronavirus pandemic. I am your host, Jukebox Harry. Peace.